Whoa. Okay. Yeah. Right.
You're rocking those earrings now, Cheryl.
Yeah,
Yes.
love it.
Oh goodness. But I didn't get mine, unfortunately, from Africa. I got this from Sweet Honey. Yeah.
Is that a shop in Leeds?
No. It was a show.
Show.
Yeah.
I thought I recognized them.
I've got another pair as well. But this one coordinates with the dress.
Yeah.
Phew.
It's kind of the 21st century version of, I don't know, reaping wheat or something. The sound of the keyboard.
Maddie, you can start.
I can start? Is it working? Or are we recording?
I'll just recording, and then whenever it's ready, it goes live. So you can start. Yeah.
Great. Thanks, Rashday. Is everyone all right to begin? Yeah? Great. Cool.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you. Right. Hello and welcome to another one of our seminars discussing diversity and self-agency in the arts. I'm Maddie and I'll be hosting today's discussion on behalf of Sheba Arts. I'm joined by an amazing panel today, Dayo, Eseonu, Peter Kalu and Cheryl Martin. Thanks for joining us today, guys, despite the technical challenges. Just to explain quickly how this is going to work. Hopefully we'll be able to take audience questions. I guess it depends whether the live element works. But we'll definitely do the first bit, which is speaking to each of you one at a time, hopefully for about 20 minutes each. And then I guess we'll either take questions from the audience, or if we don't have an audience, I'll ask some questions and maybe you can all ask some questions of each other. Cool, so let's get started. First up, I'd like to welcome Cheryl Martin. Cheryl is the co-artistic director of Manchester's Black Gold Art Festival, which is coming up on the 23rd to the 25th of October. She's worked as a poet, playwright and director. She was director in residence at Edinburgh's Traverse, and her new solo show, One Woman, won an Unlimited Welcome Collection Partnership Award, the tongue twister, which is premiering in next year at Manchester's Home before it goes on national tour, including the Unlimited Festival at the South Bank Centre. It's all really exciting. So thank you for joining us today, Cheryl.
Thank you, Maddie, for having me. And just to say, I also work with Pete Kalu right now as acting co-artistic director at Commonwealth, which is a Black-led literature national portfolio organization of Arts Council England.
Is that new that you've got that Arts Council?
Sorry?
Is the Arts Council, was that from the stuff that came out this week?
No, we didn't go for that emergency. They're a regularly funded organization.
Great, sorry, it was just a celebration. I thought maybe it was,
it
was good news. You know. Always celebrate it, because it's great. Nice. So when we chatted about what you wanted to talk about today, you mentioned that you had stopped using words such as BAME, diversity, people of colour. Could you talk to us a bit about why? And
Well, I think that the uprisings all over the summer that were focused on Black Lives Matter, that sort of really pushed forward what was already a big feeling among a lot of people, that we really hated the words like BAME, and the terms like ethnic minorities are really misleading because we aren't a minority. People from African, Southeast Asian, and East Asian diaspora communities are part of the global majority. And even here in Manchester, in 2018, 61% of school-aged children were from the African, Southeast Asian, and East Asian diaspora communities. So we'll soon be the outright majority in Manchester. And I personally don't mind terms like people of color, which is an Americanism, and I was born in the US, but I've lived 32 years in Manchester, but twice as long as I actually lived in Washington, D.C., where I come from. And I'm a British citizen and everything. My roots are now here. And I heard from a lot of younger Black people this summer that they hate the term people of color because they associate it with the term colored, which is a racist term. So I'm not going to really argue with everybody. So I personally prefer to say Black, Brown, and East Asian people, but some folks said this summer that they didn't like being reduced to their skin color. So for political reasons, I'd use the term global majority, which is what we are, or African, Southeast Asian, and East Asian diaspora communities, which to me is a bit of a mouthful, but it's more accurate, perhaps. And I personally wish we could go back to politically Black, which is which was the term for everybody, and sort of a statement of political unity, but you can't go backwards. So that's why I'm dropping a lot of those other terms.
That's great. Thanks for that. Yeah, that's a really interesting explanation. And as you say, yeah, we can't go back, so we have to be thinking of like new terms and the new ways which we identify and define ourselves and our communities. What changes would you want to create on a kind of practical level within the arts, and kind of linking into this, what the impact that you feel that this shift could have in terms of going from identifying as a minority to a majority?
Well, not just in the arts, but across the board, I think. I'd like to see more of our communities being active in politics on a local level, really local. Because if we're the majority of the taxpayers, then we should let politicians know that we are aware of that and expect our views to be taken into consideration when they spend our tax money. And to do that, you have to go to local meetings. And if there's an urgent local issue, then I think you should arrange for loads of people to go to that meeting en masse. And in the arts, I'd say the same thing. If your local theater is doing stuff that pleases its artistic director, but has absolutely nothing to do with the people who pay their salaries, and that's us, then arrange meetings with that theater and ask them where our art is hiding en masse. And bring loads of people to those meetings with you. Ask theaters how many Black, Brown, and East Asian people are in positions of power with budgets, with the ability to initiate work, hire other people, and create programs. If there are none, then why not? And if they start saying it's a question of quality, why they don't, program us, then you know that they're racist, because they're saying there isn't enough quality work being done by Black, Brown, and East Asian people, and that's ridiculous. I fall over talent all the time, but if everyone on the staff who can make decisions is from that same tiny sliver of the population, then that tiny sliver will continue to be super served. And also we who are, those of us who are out here doing the work and have been doing it for so long, who have experience and connections and stuff, we need to share our experience and mentor more younger people and artists and give them the experience they need to compete. Encourage more people to volunteer if they can afford to do that, and get onto boards. I was sort of trained to do that in the States when I was quite young. And when I first came to Manchester, I was on 6 boards of arts organizations between when I was 31 and 42. Then I was on the Arts Council Northwest board for over 7 years. And thank goodness I've seen many younger Black artists in Manchester taking the same route and doing a brilliant job. And we need more in every walk of life being encouraged to do the same. Another thing about, go into schools, let people know what options they've really got. And I mean, another thing that we could do, someone mentioned, I was on another panel earlier this week, and they were saying just, if you if you can afford to, maybe encourage people to donate tickets, because I find it hard to afford to go to the theater. So maybe if you can afford a ticket, you know, donate a ticket to somebody who can't afford to go to the theater. Encourage the theater to have that as an overall something that they do. And that's like a small thing that might get a lot more people in. I know I'm saying loads and loads of stuff, but
Loads of ideas is a lot better than nothing. What training, just to pick up on, you mentioned that you said that you were sort of trained when you were growing up to kind of to get onto boards or to be on boards and stuff. What
when
sort of
well, I went to, I had scholarships, you know, pretty much. And I had a scholarship to Williams College in Williamstown, Massachusetts, which is basically, it's a BA university, but it's a very small one. There's only two, it's like really hard to get into. So there's only 2,000 people there. And so that means, break it down to years, that's about 500 people per year in a 4-year uni. And in my year, there were only 24 Black people out of 500. And I was sort of, all the teachers knew me before I got there. Like the day I went to my first, you know, get together of the freshers, they were like, "Oh, Cheryl, yes, we've heard a lot about you." So they encouraged me to be on selection panels. I was an English major, so English lit. And so they put me on selection panels to choose who would get jobs. And that's what I mean by training. So from like when I was 18, I was deciding these poor people's fates and finding out what these, you know, what people looked for, what they wanted, you know, how you should put yourself forward, how to be on a panel and sway other people to your opinion if they didn't agree with you in the beginning. All those things are really useful later on. Yeah, and I'm from a generation that we were taught if we had that kind of privilege, because I was there as a scholarship girl. Let's make it clear. My parents were not minted; they were just ordinary. And so if you get, and then I went to Cambridge over here after that. So if you've got that kind of privilege, then you are supposed to use that privilege for your community. And so I felt like that's what I'm supposed to do. I'm supposed to get onto these boards and make sure that some, you know, if they're doing stuff, that Black artists are included, that they think about us, that there's somebody there to always say, but what if nobody else is saying it?
yeah, that's really interesting because I don't really really kind of, I guess, know much about the kind of school system or whatever in the States. But when you're saying kind of then you went to Cambridge, I kind of am trying to picture it in that way and how you can imagine that that there are schools obviously in England that lead you to the top jobs, Eton, places like that, and it's so much of it is not talent or anything spectacular at all. It's confidence and like the knowledge of situations and spaces, and so it's just interesting to just to think about how being exposed, like you say, to being on boards and stuff kind of gives you that like that ability to do that later on.
And also, I should say, maybe I'm not obsessed with this majority minority thing, but growing up in DC when I did in the 60s and 70s, it was 70% Black. And I didn't believe we were a minority till we moved to Colorado when I was a teenager. Just simply didn't believe it. And that does, you know, a lot of people talk about that ownership of buildings and feeling like this space is my space. And I think that growing up like that in DC helps you feel that way, even when the space isn't helping you, if that makes any sense. And it's our tax money, you know. It's in the Arts Council, that's taxpayer funded, and the National Lottery Project grants, that is the lottery. Who plays the lottery? And, you know, do you see stuff that reflects the people who are actually funding everything in those buildings? And I just wonder, you know, if you know, we are going to be the outright majority, say, in Manchester very soon. And what about the way that Manchester is set up, or the arts is set up in Manchester, reflects that fact? Who's actually preparing for that? And, you know, what will they do if suddenly the people who are paying for them decide, you've ignored and patronized us all this long time, we'd like to fund something else? And so what is your answer then? And, you know, I feel like everybody has the right to see themselves reflected, you know, in films or on television, on stages. And I just feel like I want there to be more and more and more Black artists.
Yeah, yeah, it's so right what you're just saying about the kind of the paying in terms of like taxes and stuff to all of these pots of money, and the fact then that it's just fundamentally wrong that then those pots of money aren't given out in the same kind of array as the population that pay in. Like that's wrong, obviously. But there's a sense of kind of like they kind of excuse it, as you were saying, in so many different ways, like people saying, oh, it's quality of what arts. It's obviously not, as we all know. And yeah, I think just reimagining it in that way makes you kind of realise, like, hold on, actually we're all chipping into this pot, so it should be there for those that want it. You said in when we're emailing that the existing structures, if they don't adjust to a new reality, then they'll become as redundant as they are currently irrelevant. So what does that mean? What kind of adjustments or changes would you envisage?
Well, as I was just saying, if the population has a certain makeup and then nothing is reflecting that, then again, where is the connection to your community, your actual community? Where is your connection to the taxpayers or the lottery players, or, you know, the people who are actually putting in and making all this art possible? When you have like a top-down model where some people decide what they think is wonderful, and if you don't go, it's because you're a Philistine, I don't think that's totally true. And there are other forms of art. You know, there are other cultural traditions that aren't being reflected. And what is reflected is extremely narrow and really reflects a small group of middle class and upper middle class white people and nobody else. Where's the white working class representation? It was a big thing in the 60s and then in the 70s, and then it just sort of slowly disappeared to the point now, well, when Maggie Thatcher cut the funding for local education authorities, who used to pay the way for everybody to go to drama school. And that when she did that, you could actually see the future that we're living in now, where only basically well-off kids can afford to be in the arts. And we've got to combat that. And if it goes on that way, it is going to be irrelevant, you know, completely irrelevant, because it's not going to reflect anything about the people who live here, the people who work here, the people who pay in the money here, the people whose lives also are worth celebrating. So I think that and right now with theaters, of course you were talking about the big payout with the emergency funds that they announced yesterday, and that's great. But in the meantime, the reason why they need that is because the financial model most theaters have been running on just got totally blown by COVID. Coronavirus has put an end to that. And if people think we're ever going to get back to where we were in January 2020, I don't think that's ever going to happen. So, you know, social distancing is here at least until 2022. Is the government going to keep bailing you out? Or our theater is going to start figuring out a different way of being. And I think it's an existential crisis. And heaven knows I wish, oh, so much that it never happened. You know, I would give anything for it never to have happened. But since it has happened, you know, you need to prepare for a different future.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And you're right in that, you know, it's an awful tragedy. But it's what we do now, and like how things change and adapt. That's kind of, I guess, the focus, isn't it? As we kind of look forward to, yeah, like you say, years of still this kind of playing out, and how things become more durable, I guess. I just wanted to pick up on something you said about theatres as kind of serving the interests of their like creative director or kind of board or whatever, as opposed to their communities. And I find it so interesting, the fact that so many theatres like put so much effort into like outreach and all these kind of things quite badly most of the time. And it's like a lot of theatres in kind of like the big sort of institutional ones seem to have a real problem with getting people in, which just seems sort of crazy when you go to actual good, like good community centres or good places where community arts are happening, and like people are flooding in through the doors. And like, I just wondered kind of what you thought about that and why that's a challenge for these places.
Well, I know that a lot of theaters have outreach, like you say, they do all the outreach and everything, but it's sort of like, who's doing that? Do they actually know, you know, the communities they're supposedly doing outreach to? Or is it, again, a top-down exercise? And people tend to come see things when they're interested in it. And if you put something on that's actually connected to people, and people, you know, anybody who think that that's dumbing down, that's not what it's like at all. You know, people will take in quite complex theater forms. You can do all, in fact, an audience that's not used to coming to theater, you can do much more experimental things with that audience than with a regular theater audience who's used to just coming to see some well-made play with really expensive, you know, props and costumes. You can do really wild things with people that don't come to the theater that often, and much more interesting to me. You know, but if you need to think, if everybody puts on a Shakespeare, and of course I like Shakespeare, of course everybody does, wonderful, yes. But if all you're doing is putting on a Shakespeare because it's on the syllabus, and it, you know, blah, 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 and everybody does the same Shakespeare every, you know, in the same year, maybe people aren't going to be terribly enthusiastic about that. Or if you just program really safe stuff because you're worried about filling seats and you want to make sure that your regulars come and see whatever they're used to seeing, that doesn't build for the future in any way. And you know, you've got to give people a reason to come in the door besides just saying it's good for you. It's not medicine.
Yeah, line up and get your dose of Miller, Chekhov. Yeah, no, you're so right. It is. It's like, it's making stories and just having people in the space that are connected to communities, as opposed to just programming things like you say that kind of just perpetuates the same audiences and kind of.
Yeah, it's about who are your decision makers. Like I said, who's making the decisions? Who's got the power? You know, if you look in film, God bless him, you know, Chadwick Boseman, so sorry to have lost him. But look at Black Panther, and, you know, that's the famous example. They kept saying that, you know, a big Black expensive movie won't sell around the world, blah, blah, blah. So they got a Black guy who had the power to greenlight the film, a Black director, Black designer, Black writer, Black costume designer, Black everything. And it made billions, you know, over $1 billion. It's like when you actually trust people and give them you know, just give them space and let them do what they need to do. And it will work.
Thank you. Yeah, I feel like that's also a great note to move on to Peter on. That's really really
you.
like uplifting final sentence. Thank you, Cheryl. Yeah, thanks for everything that you've just said. Yeah, it was really interesting stuff. We'll go now to Pete Kalu. Pete is a writer, produces a wide range of works, including short stories, poems, novels, radio, theatre, TV scripts, film scripts. He is the judge of this year's Jalak Prize for the Book of the Year by a Writer of Colour, and is also commissioned on the National Colonial Countryside Project, and as we've just heard, works with Cheryl at Common Word. So thanks for joining us today, Pete.
Yep, thanks for inviting me. It's great to be here.
Now, just to kind of link on to some of the stuff that Cheryl has just been talking about, could you speak to us a bit about your kind of idea of the artist as a disruptor, and how whiteness responds to this idea of the kind of framing of it is the global marginality or the global minority, and how that affects our perceptions and ideas about diversity, and how that affects artists? Sorry, that is definitely more than one question. You can start with any of them.
Yeah, right. How long you got? First of all, let me briefly just respond a little bit to some of the things that have been mentioned by Cheryl previously, and just to pick up on a couple of those things. One of the questions of the gatekeepers and of the decision makers and the bottleneck that occurs because a few people are deciding the fate of artists and are deciding what is art, etc. And those few people may be predominantly white. The revelation that YouTube is soon going to be larger in terms of its audience than the BBC is actually highly interesting to me, because what YouTube does is it doesn't commission work, it platforms work that everybody is creating. So putting to one side the nature of how it monetizes that platform, it's actually a highly democratic method of putting art about. And similarly, in terms of the idea of this as a community engagement, again, for YouTube, for everybody, for every creator on YouTube, they create their own audience, they find their own audience, they work out how to bring their own audience. And so there's a multiplicity of audiences being built by individuals or by small groups via YouTube. And in that sense, it's quite a liberatory thing, the way in which those audiences can form independently of the gatekeepers and the decision makers, etc., etc. And for that reason, you do, just as with Black Panther, you do get emerging talent that nobody would have backed had they had to go to the decision makers and petition or submit or plead or whatever it is that people do before those decision makers. So there is that one aspect of, say, the digital 21st century environment that works in favor of developing work and of not giving so much power to those conventional outlets, which then hold your fate in their hands. I don't know if that's consistent, Cheryl, with your own thinking, or am I way out?
Sorry. No, I think that sounds pretty consistent. I think. Yeah.
Well, it's the thing with what Steve McQueen said recently about the film industry. There's just in the last maybe this year, there's been a wave of film produced by Black writers, produced by Black, I believe, Black producers, directed by Black directors, and it's happening now. But you know, Steve McQueen, I think, was saying that there's a whole welter of Marlon Brandos, the Black Marlon Brandos, etc., who are actually still waiting, still bartending, still, you know, still have had their dreams thwarted by the past structures which militated against them getting a break, as you call it. And one of the things that I find that bemuses me sometimes is that while with the Black Lives Matter, a number of organizations, white-led organizations, have come out and said, yes, we understand Black Lives Matter. We commit to ensuring that we take a more aware approach to our programming that factors in racial prejudice, racism, etc. But it's always forward-looking. I've not really heard any of them say, yeah, and for the past 30 years, we didn't do it right. You know? and that comes to the Steve McQueen thing, that, yeah, because they didn't do it right, there go all that a generation of talent wasted, you know, by those locked doors. So yeah, there isn't any kind of mea culpa, particularly coming from the arts world, which makes me feel that perhaps it's less genuine and true, and more self-serving, more virtue signaling than a courageous, disciplined commitment to changing things, which, Maddie, brings me to an element of your question, at least. In terms of disruption, yeah, I think that the artists generally are the stage before revolution, in a sense that we know society needs to change. We all know this. How does it change? Now, the French Revolution, you know, the Russian Revolution, and we can come back to this maybe later, but when huge masses of people come to the street and take their destiny in their own hands, that's a form of revolutionary change that occur. The step before that society can take is to listen to the artists. The artists are often, activist artists at least, feel they have an awareness of the injustices of society, of the things, the way in which society is structured that lead to unfairness, injustice, our doom one way or another. And I think Gramsci talked about the pessimism of the intellect, but the optimism of the will. You know, that we are actually optimists as artists. We believe by sheer force of our art, we can persuade in a good way people to change the way in which things are structured. However, when that wave, if that wave fails, then you get harsher forms of change, i.e. revolution. And so we are the precursors sometimes to revolution. We are the disruptors who should be listened to. And when we're not listened to, things get more and more dire. Turning to the second element of your question, how does whiteness respond to the idea that first of all, that it exists? You know, whiteness has not been acknowledged as such. What whiteness is seen as the universal. This is the norm, you know, and you see it in all forms of artistic practice. You know, a man comes into a bar, it's assumed it's a white man, you know. If a black man comes into the bar, you have to write, a black man comes into a bar, you know. So the assumption is always white, and that's part of white's privilege, yeah. What I feel is that the response will not necessarily be uniform. I feel that there'll be a defensiveness, an attempt to circle the wagons, an attempt to mount a rearguard action against the idea that whiteness is not universal, that white people are an ethnic group like everyone else, and actually in the minority globally. And at the same time, there will be those who are progressive and who will consider that, yes, they accept and realize that their time has come to step off that podium as, you know, the exemplar of human beings, which is how they've always sort of maintained their supremacy, and who will give way. But that giving way is no easy thing. It's a very uncomfortable thing when Cheryl mentions, for instance, going on boards, black people getting on boards. But for a black person to get onto a board, maybe a white person has to leave a board. But to leave a board is to surrender power. And Malcolm X was saying, you know, that power is never given, it's always taken. And I think this is where what the effect of the activist movement of the Black Lives Matter movement has been that it's been an assertion of power such that we are now being invited onto boards, etc. Without that assertion, you know, with the status quo ante had rolled on, there would have been little movement, little change. So yeah, there's a combination of the disruptors, the artists with a vision, disrupting the status quo, and the activists who have legs, who will get out onto the street, which brings us to the point about where's the rub in this digital age between street and mass gathering, let's say, in theatres and home studios and creating your art in isolation. And for that, you know, the idea that we as an artist, we move forwards, you know, we create what we can. But I still feel that, just as we saw with the Black Lives Matter movement, that for an artist to work entirely in isolation is a fundamental contradiction in what the purpose of art for many artists is. And we have yet to figure out really how we navigate that. I only have questions, I don't have answers. How we navigate this period of time in which coming together and joining and uniting, it can't be done physically, or can be done only with great problems physically, and it's become digital. So the disruption can be digital, and it can be via Twitter and social media, etc. But ultimately, I feel that, like with Black Lives Matter, it does require us sometimes to go onto the street and make our case there, because ultimately the highest court in the land is not actually the Supreme Court. It's not the law lords or whoever they call themselves now. It's the people. The people, and I think that's one of the fundamental things we try to do, is to reach the people. And maybe coming back to what Cheryl was saying about the people are not to be found in the theatres, then maybe it's a duty of the artists to find the people where they are. I always, picking up a word you used, Maddy, about, I think it's outreach or engagement, you know, sort of outreach departments, you know, it's like, in order to find the people don't need to find themselves. You know? it emphasizes, the very language emphasizes a disconnect of the theatre from where people are and what they're doing. So yeah, these are revolutionary times. There are times where there are fundamental structural fissions, and we've yet to see how that plays out. But the Black Lives Matter movement has been one tremendous contribution to change, and artistic endeavor is another. I hope that perhaps hasn't answered your question, but has at least given a nice tour around a potential answer.
Yeah, no, that's been great. Yeah, really, so much in there. Yeah, outreach is a terrible word. In that it implies, like you say, a division between the two groups, and it also implies a totally one-way relationship, because one person is reaching out, there's no like energetic contribution from the other side, so it's like totally just like grabbing and pulling someone in, as opposed to like dialect.
Yeah, I was in Nigeria, and I met a Professor Akanji, who was doing theatre in Nigeria, and they would go to the people and create the theatre with them, you know. And there are, in other words, there are ways of practicing theatre. If I may be, I don't know if it's even controversial, but there were many bad things that happened when that bomb went off in Manchester. But one of the great things that happened was the Royal Exchange Theatre suddenly had to get out of that building and start making theatre with the people. And I think that was a real big change that was brought about in the way that Royal Exchange understood theatre. And so, yeah, that idea that as you say, it's a one-way thing, drag people into the theatre. And so I can't remember which of you said, you know, it's like a medicine. Here's your medicine, force it down your throat. You know, is the model, the old model, which must be overthrown.
Yeah, you're so right. And what you're saying about Zoom as well. There's that song, isn't there? The revolution will not be televised. I think the revolution will not be Zoom.
Yeah.
It will have to happen in a physical space and or in some space. And I think working out how we're going to do that in terms of coming together as artists is going to be tricky, but hopefully will bring kind of exciting discoveries. So you've spoken quite a lot about the Black Lives Movement and about the kind of discrimination in the arts, especially with kind of gatekeeping with funding, and the typical person being white, largely from a fairly rich or privileged background and often male. So there's this kind of like typicality of like funding, and the kind of the struggles therefore of getting it if you are not that. What do you think specifically the Black Lives Matter movement has kind of shown about the state and the status of black arts and the kind of how they are funded or not funded as the case?
That's a great question, Maddie. Just before I attempt an answer, I know prior to us going live, there was a coordinator who had a bell that she said she would ring when we overrun. How many minutes have I got? I don't want to hear that bell.
You've still got about 10 minutes.
All right, cool. I'll wax on them, no problem. Or a hook will sneak out from somewhere and grab me. Okay, so the Black Lives Matter movement and how it affects or may affect the status of black art. Well, I think again there was an old way of understanding the arts, which was which came by the phrase cultural equity, and cultural equity, I guess, is a summary phrase for something that Cheryl was talking about in terms of the demographics, about demographic change, and the idea that, okay, if you have 60% of the population, then where is the 60% of the art that is something that they would want? You know, it's a straight line kind of equation there. And of course, there are then various arguments put in place why that can't occur, you know, and without entering into those arguments in full, some of them hold some water, but most of them, I feel, are just rationalizations or excuses for the allocation of funds to the dominant group, which, as you indicate, tends to be white and tends to be male. The Black Lives Matter movement led to a flurry of internal meetings, I believe, among arts organizations, and I think it quickened the change that many may have been contemplating. There's this old thing with change, and certainly in the civil rights movement, of if not now, when? You know, and generally, when you went to arts organizations and proposed an idea that had a black element to it, the answer would be, not now, but soon. you know, we love your idea and we're going to get back to you. As soon as we've fulfilled all the other obligations we've got, you know, we'll schedule you for a meeting with our subcommittee, which will produce a report, which may result in a few factors, a few guideposts to greenlighting something that you may produce, which might not be this, but might be something else further down the line. Thank you so much for coming in. Please close the door as you go out. That was a general response. You know, you needed a pair of binoculars to see the end game of that one. And that has quickened. Now people are opening doors a little faster and saying, yes, you know, we hold our hands up. We haven't published, in my specialist area is publication. You know, I've seen the publishing industry say, okay, yeah, we haven't published many or any sometimes black writers whatsoever. Cheryl's point again, you know, that one of their excuses, one of their favorite excuses, was that they aren't good enough, and the method by which they would respond to pressure prior to Black Lives Matter was what we'll do is we'll institute some diversity training. We'll institute some training in how to write your short stories, how to write your poetry. We'll give you some training on marketing. We'll give you some training on this, that, and the other. Everything but publish you. Because the idea was that actually it's not our problem, it's yours. You yourself have an imperfection. You don't understand marketing. You don't write well enough. You don't understand the genre. You don't understand the techniques, you know? And having been in publishing for a while, you know, based on my own experience of white and black writers, I was like, no, actually, we're probably actually better than the average white writer. You know, what's going on here? And so it's come about now, to give you very specific examples, that some of the writers who we discovered, black writers in the YA genre, in the young adult fiction genre, who we discovered 8 years ago, they're getting published now. And I don't believe, though it will be argued, that is due to development, due to training, due to them learning more techniques. It's that finally the publishers are thinking, you know what, we're going to get roasted alive. If we don't do something, we're going to have to surrender some of that white privilege and actually publish some of the black writers. And all the great, you know, encomiums, the great praise songs in praise of the black writers who were standing there 8 years ago with the same product, saying, being told that they were not good enough, that there is a slight bitter taste when I imbibe this stuff, because they of course they've evolved as writers, but nevertheless, as a statistical analysis, you know, the writing is pretty much where it was. The level is there. They were good then. They're good now, but they were good then. They were simply not allowed to get published. And it's what Steve McCune was saying is true, then it's same in film as well. Now, one of the ways in which the black artists, black writers have always fostered their career has been to go around problems, go around obstacles, and innovate, invent new genre, invent new techniques, invent new audiences, invent new ways of communicating with those audiences, to stop the blockages. And so I think it's there's a cultural theorist called Bell Hooks, you know, who wrote about that marginalization, and she was saying that, yeah, okay, we can have an ambition to get to the center, you know, to be published by Penguin or whatever, if Penguin is the center, but at the same time, the pressures we undergo and the innovation, the inventiveness that we are forced to acquire to keep going as artists actually creates unique art. And she was saying, you know, there is power in the margin, and there is innovation in the margin. There is a richness in the margin that should not be ignored. And so, yeah, it's a combination of we keep going in innovating. I could name artists, but I don't want to name one artist and then the other artist will say, hey, how come he's not name checking me? You know, well, I've seen so much innovation that has come about through necessity, you know, and these pioneers, you know, they've been placed in a situation where they've had to invent new things, and we keep that, in my view, and we also go towards the center and say, you know what, we are now the center. Demographically, we are the center. The head of the chief executive officer of Penguin Random House was at the London Book Fair 2 or 3 years ago, and he was saying exactly what Cheryl has said, that the demographics have now changed. And so now we actually need to publish black books because we need the audience. And for once, I started believing these people, because whenever they said, we're going to publish black books because we feel we ought to, in other words, they make an ethical or moral case, you knew that, well, 10, 20 years, nothing ever happened, you know, it just all shoved off into subcareers. When he said we need the money, we'll be obsolete, or what I don't know what Cheryl's phrase was, but, you know, irrelevant, yeah, irrelevant if we don't start publishing them. Then I knew change was afoot. And so I think generally the Black Lives Matter movement has quickened the pace and has allowed those allies who were seeking change, but perhaps at a lower rate than we would wish. It's allowed them to build their case much more strongly. lastly, Maddie, and I know that bell's going to come out. You know, for my own work with the colonial countryside people, I was looking at the history of the slave trade and how that slave trade money led to the building of many of the major National Trust houses. There's been a huge report come out recently about that. And as I was, my job as an artist was to write short stories around this, etc. And as I started to write the short stories, there were waves and waves of anxiety, hesitations. I was taken to one side by people who were connected to National Trust saying, Pete, can you just sort of water this down a little bit? Can you ameliorate this? Can you soften this? You know, this won't wash with our people. You know, we'll never get this passed, you know. And, you know, I listened, but then I ignored them in one case. And it came about. Black Lives Matter happened just as we were having the argument. And suddenly the doors opened. And they said, you know what, Pete, it's fine. You can go ahead and do this. So that's the effect that it had. In another case, I won't mention where, well, I was basically pretty much decommissioned, you know, thrown off the job. And by one means or another, I managed to do what I was saying that artists sometimes do. I did a self-funded, self-directed project around the issue that has become one of the most widely seen videos, artistic videos that I've ever produced, you know. And people come up to me and say, Pete, you know, that's an amazing video. How did you do that? You know, it's a song actually, the composition, the poem that became the song, the singing of it, the arrangement, it was all done in the heat, the heat of anger at the obstacles that were being placed in my way to ensure that I didn't tell this story. And, you know, nothing fires me more than that kind of thing. And it produced some of my best work, I feel. So yeah, the margin sometimes is great because you get to do what you want to do. You don't have to go through all these mediators. But the center is also where we belong. I hope vaguely I answered your question, and I've not heard any bell.
No, definitely, yeah. No, that was a really interesting answer. You kind of want the security of the centre in terms of people deserve to be paid properly and they deserve to be recognised, but also with the kind of outlook that the Edge gives you and that kind of originality and perspective that provides. I also think there's something so kind of, it's rubbish that you lost that job, obviously, but obviously it sounds like you made something amazing out of it. But there is some kind of validation in the power of a story if you are banned from telling it. There is some kind of like, wow, you know, that needs saying if someone is really saying don't say it. So I think that's pretty powerful. Thanks, Pete. We're going to move on to Dayo now, and hopefully we'll be able to come back with some kind of general chats at the end. So welcome to our final panel guest, Dayo Eseonu. Dayo works as a communications officer at GMCVO, coordinating a project for Black, Asian and minority ethnic social entrepreneurs to join a network, capacity building and mentoring programs. She is also completing a PhD in politics at the University of Manchester on inclusion of racially minoritized young people in public policy. Welcome, Dayo.
Hi. Hi, thanks for having me. Really, really interested to be talking to and listening to Cheryl and Peter as well. It's just great. I remember when I was invited and I saw both of you, and I was thinking, oh, do I have anything to say about the art sector? Because it's not really kind of a space that I work in, but actually listening to both of you, it's just, you know, there's so much synergy and kind of learning from what I do, as well as kind of in both in my work and in also in my PhD as well. I'll let you ask the question before I start waffling on.
Yeah, so could you talk to us a bit, I guess maybe this is where the synergy will come in, about the issues that BAME social and enterprises are facing, and whether you feel those parallels or differences with the kind of arts that we've been talking about?
Yeah, definitely. So I think both Peter and Cheryl have mentioned kind of community arts. And what we found out is a lot of community arts are social enterprises, right? So from kind of the art sector, there's this issue of the barriers that are there. But then on the social enterprise of things, so maybe, you know, people are starting to think about trading models, and a lot of them look at social enterprises as an option. But actually there's also barriers that we found we did a piece of research about 18 months ago and found out that actually and this is some of the things that both Pete and Cheryl have alluded to. So it was things around the barriers around kind of the lack of clarity of information around what social entrepreneurs, what social enterprise are, what the opportunities are, kind of you know, where to go to for finance, where to go to for business support. People just don't know the sector enough and also don't know where to go to get that support. There's also a feeling that people were networked. So basically to know people, to know where to go. And where you're not networked, then actually it's difficult basically to know kind of the language, to know these opportunities that are available for people. And I think it is, you know, those are some of the big barriers. So, you know, businesses, social enterprises are businesses in the sense that, and they face the same challenges of kind of the startups and not surviving and things like that. But there's just that additional layer for BAME social entrepreneurs that actually that's systemic. You know, they're sort of issues of barriers that people just have faced, you know, not just being looked at as people that they come into contact with aren't culturally competent enough to have the conversations around how to make their businesses successful. So they're not code switching, if you like. They're not kind of adopting and changing their language and their behaviors when they are trying to support BAME social entrepreneurs. And Cheryl, I'm conscious that you don't like the word, but I think it's a term, and you're right, in the conversations that we're having, the social entrepreneurs in our network. So we've got a network of social entrepreneurs. And the conversations that we're having as well is the label isn't helpful. You know, it's very kind of not unifying, but uniforming. So pushing people onto one label, but actually there's super diversity. There's diversity within kind of the different communities, the different kind of journeys of oppression, it's all very different. So having just one label and not looking at the individual kind of experiences takes away from trying to actually do anything substantial with any sort of plans or policy to make change. So I think those are kind of the big things that have come out, and I think and I think GMCVO, we're in that conversation as, you know, so where to go next. And to be honest, and this is what I've said, a label is only helpful for policymakers. It's not helpful for the communities. You know, the communities are just concerned about the labeling of the inequality of power, the labeling of the racist practices. You know, that's what they're more bothered about, rather than kind of what are we called. Is more like, you know, if you're speaking about a specific community or communities, then name those, rather than kind of just generic labels. So I think, yeah, that's what I'll say on that, I guess.
That's great, thanks, Dayo. How do people get involved in policy making? And what does representation in policy making look like? And also just a bit of context, because I don't personally, for my shame, know anything about policy making. So could you also just give us a bit of background about, I'm assuming representation is probably not that good, but could you tell us a bit about what it's like at the moment?
So I think people, so policy making, this is the thing, so Cheryl's already alluded to it, so the going down to sort of local meetings and the politics. So there's a politics, and people really speak a lot around kind of the politics and showing up at local meetings, becoming local councillors and things like that. But there are also, so once the politics, not once, but obviously, so there's politics and policy making, but policy making are the plans and the way that plans to either deliver services or to basically just a policy is a plan, right? And on how to tackle a particular issue, whether that's education, whether that's employment, whether that's the arts, whatever. It's just a plan by either a local government, a regional body, you know, national organization, the Westminster, whatever. And I think people aren't necessarily aware that, so after the politics, no, not over, but, you know, as alongside the politics or the political side of things, the MPs, you know, the mayors, all those kind of local councillors, alongside that, there are also plans within, I guess, public sector organizations the bureaucrats, so to speak, to implement these policies, to implement these plans. And there are spaces for people to get involved with that as well. So they don't have to be councillors, they don't have to be, in political offices, but actually where, there are calls out to say, oh, have your say. A lot of people will see that, have your say. And that's part of getting involved in policy making. That's kind of saying, you know what, this is an issue that I know affects my community and I want to say something. I have something to say about that. I have something valuable to add. I can bring an experience of this from a particular perspective that will be missing from these conversations on how do we implement this action plan. There'll be perspectives that need to be heard, that people who are white, middle class, non-disabled, straight, heterosexual, just won't have if people don't get involved with kind of that aspect of policy making. And it goes alongside that. So how do people get involved, I think was your question. And I think it's literally it's the same thing, just being aware of what's happening in your local council, what are your local council's plans on education, on what it is that you are passionate about, you want to see make a change to, get involved with that. So that's what I was saying. That's really interesting to hear both of you talk, because I'm like, get involved with, the boards, like you said, it's getting involved with all kind of the or the people who make plans about particular issues, get involved with those types of organizations, so that you are bringing that perspective that it's, if you think about, I don't know if you've read the book, I always forget her name, but the book with the woman, and I think she wrote a book about women and data. I think it's Caroline Pereira, I can't pronounce her name. But again, she shows how the lack of perspective of women in loads of different things have influenced how actually, so for the iPhone, for example, the size of the iPhones are around a typical man's hand, right? It's the same around race, where we're not in the room, when all these decisions are being made, there'll be perspectives that just doesn't occur to people, because, there's obviously the racist, bits of things, but there's also the fact that there's ignorance that people just don't have, that when we're in the room, we bring that into the room. We're like, have you thought about this really well? And how will it affect it? So I think, this is where it's just, if there's something that you're really passionate about, find out these organizations. And this is the moment, I think, really, particularly with organizations putting out all these Black Lives Matter support statements. This is the moment to kind of get involved. And I heard Gary Young speak the other day, and he said, Black Lives Matter, and while we might not know, oh yes, thank you, Cheryl, Invisible Women, that's it, by Caroline, let me see, Caroline Criado Perez, apologies if I've massacred the name. So I think it's similar when you think about kind of the race element of it as well. I lost my train of thought. I was talking about, I don't know. It's gone now. But I think, yes, I think it was just around policy making and getting people involved with that. And it's just a case of getting involved. There will be opportunities to oh yes, that's it. Gary Young was saying that Black Lives Matter, what it has done is, while yes, it's protests, and what it has done is light little fires in people in different sectors, in different spaces, who might not have had the, I guess, confidence or felt like they could bring that to the table. What it's done is it's just basically enabled people to say, hey, what about? Or hey, have you thought about, and I think we won't, that's when hopefully, and I think he said he felt like this was what was different, was the fact that, yes, it might not be sort of an organized, we might not get together, who knows, we might, but, he was just more like, it's lit fires in different spaces, in different people, in different communities across the world to try and do things differently, which will will move us a bit closer to kind of that racial equality kind of journey, if you like. So yeah, I think.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Dayo. Yeah, I've seen some things from that book as well. Is it the one where it says that seat belts are made for male bodies so that women are more likely to die in car crashes?
Yeah, yes.
Horrible.
When it's just it's awful when you think about
Yeah,
it.
it is.
And if you think about race as well, I think there's a young man who's done a textbook to look at how symptoms appear in sort of skin, in our skin, because the way some of us, we don't turn blue, for example, because of the color of our skin. But actually, and thinking about even COVID, people have died because I've heard of a story about, they were ringing the ambulance and they were like, oh, well, you're not blue, so you can't be poorly. And it's like, we don't turn blue. And, so and I think that these are some of the conversations and the perspectives that if people are, ethnically diverse people were in the room, things will start to bring these perspectives in. Or when I found out that plaster, sticking plaster was the color of a white person, I'd never thought about it until I saw someone who had developed kind of, plaster for Black and brown people. The little things that you just think, if we were in the room, things like this would happen, and are more likely, not that they will. There are other factors that come into place, and politics and all of that. But yeah, I think
Yeah, it's like what someone was saying earlier about the kind of what I think Pete was saying about how you have to write black male walks into into the scene or whatever, and then if it's a white male you just put man walks into the scene. So it's like getting away from that the default is this, and how having more people, like you say, in policy making would maybe shift that. You ended on something which links really well to this question. What does power sharing look like, do you think, and how would it work?
Honestly, so I think so. Cheryl asked the question. She said, "Who's doing the outreach? Who's got the power?" Pete mentioned about these gatekeepers, right? And power is seen as a zero sum, right? Like something has to give, someone has to give over, or it's seen in kind of that term that, oh, I have to step, and yes, people will have to, sharing power will involve stepping back. And I think this is where we need to get to is, and this is sort of echoing, I think, what was been said before, was that power sharing looks like a positive sum. It's a case of, right, we'll make room, right, for more people. We will make room to have people who are different to us, who have different voices from us, and we will be responsive to those voices. So it's not just kind of the making room and then not being responsive, but it's actually, so what are their asks? What are their asks? What is it, have they been going on? And people have probably been saying the same things for years, but because there's not been any responsiveness to these asks, I think the time has come, I think, that there needs to be some kind of responsiveness that's then reflected in the policy that's being taken, in the action, in the way that organizations are run, in the programs that are being funded, in the programs that are being commissioned, in the artists, also sort of being specific to the art sector, is sharing that power to questioning this kind of hegemony, of what good looks like, what quality looks like, what talent looks like. It's, just questioning some of those assumptions would mean then you share power with these, you share spaces. If producers, for example, are being asked to commission something on ethnic minorities, or just commission different, I don't want to speak on something I don't know, but if they're being asked to commission things, think about who can I share power with that's from an ethnically diverse community that will add value to what it is that they're trying to produce or do. And I think that for me, that's what power sharing will look like. And I think that's the next step. It's not just around giving them access to these spaces. It's not about, oh, we'll listen to you. It's not about, oh yes, we'll plan to do this in. And I wish I'd written down what Peter said about, the long-winded thing. It's not about that. It's not about, it's more about the power sharing, about the now, the responding to in the plans, in the implementation. It's responding to that. So that's, for me, is power sharing. It's not waiting now. It's not waiting for a time when it would work better. It's not an added project or an extra thing on top of what you have to do, but it's centering it within kind of your normal day-to-day, everyday practices in your organizations. That actually, how do we respond to, you know, these kind of asks that are coming from ethnically diverse or racially minoritized, which is what I use in my PhD communities, really. So, yeah.
That's great, thank you, Dayo. They're really interesting, and really interesting to have that kind of different perspective on it. Yeah, really, really good. In the absence of an audience, does anyone have any questions for each other? Because you are each other's audience.
I'm interested in what Dayo has been saying about power sharing, and I just thought, how would she articulate how that might occur in organizations that have almost exclusively white staff in Manchester, where there is this very high black population? Because the thing, you know, the linguist in me says is always spinning off to saying, oh, all words are metaphors, you know, and this power sharing it sounds beautiful, you know, it sounds a lovely thing. You get the word sharing in anything, and everyone says, yeah, I'm into it. But it's quite a functional analysis, and whereas the first word, power, is more of a sort of conflict-based analysis. So the power sharing is a yoking of two actually contradictory terms in some ways. So yeah, I know organizations that are almost exclusively white.
Yeah.
What would power sharing look like for them? White staff, white boards.
Yeah. Thank you so much, because I have to grapple with that, this question, PhD. So that is a really good thing for me to reflect on, I think. And I think you're right, you know, power and sharing doesn't necessarily kind of merge together when you think about it, because it has been kind of this opposing, they've been kind of put as opposing side, but there's this academic, and you're right, I need to reflect what it looks like in practice, but there's this academic who says that actually power has been made to be a negative connotation in terms of the, you know, the power over, but actually sometimes can just be, in the word in itself can be just, you know, is the power to do something, and then it becomes negative when it is, you know, power over. Power sharing would then be, for me, is if it's the power to do something, right, is then you share that power. And I think in a specific situation where it's an organization that's mostly white, you know, some people will say, and I've had conversations with, you know, organizations, because I worked in HR as well and led on equality and diversity and stuff like that, and they would say, oh, but we can't change the composition of our staff, right? Because obviously people are employed and all that kind of stuff, you know, fair enough. So what does that look like then in terms of power sharing? Is there is there the opportunity to diversify the board, right? Who then actually have a say in the running of the organization? Is there an opportunity to have, until at least, you know, recruitment practices catch up with, to then diversify the organization? So when attrition happens, you know, staff start to leave, how are you then replacing those that are leaving? But in the meantime, are there any kind of institutional bodies like, you know, panels and advisory boards or whatever, but not just advisory in name, but actually, you know, task and finish groups, or, you know, actual power is shared with those types of, I guess, for now.
My last question. It's the old lawyer in me is coming out now. Let me cut to the quick and go to management theory. You know, they say that management is about change. It's about navigating change. What would you say to a board or a set of staff that are exclusively white? Oh, that is virtually exclusively white, and that has been so for 20 years. Would you say to them that they have failed to manage? in the sense that they have failed to change in line with society. In which case, if they have failed to manage, would you make the next step and say they should be fired?
Oh, wow, that's...
Fire some people! Fire some people!
Yeah, no, to be fair, I think there will be people who will definitely call for that, I think. And I think, but this is my own personal view, right? Is fair enough, people have been able to kind of skate over, the issues of not actually dealing with, racist practices and systemic injustices and things like that. They've been able to get away with it so far because there's not been that much of a spotlight, right? So now that there's a spotlight on it and you can't claim ignorance, or, you can't kind of hide under, oh, I didn't know, or no, look, like, you can't do that anymore. I think there needs to be a space for people to grow and for people to respond. But this is my personal view, and people might disagree or not, but I think my personal view is, if there is actual responsiveness that goes on, so from now, let's say, right, there's some responsiveness that goes on now, and if 5 years down the line, you're still telling the same stories, then yes, you should be fired, because you haven't done what you should do and responded proactively to the issues that were raised in your organization. So I think maybe not straight away, but that might be quite tactical, but I think that's just my.
That's a great answer, thank you.
Well, I mean, I know that a lot of American companies from the States, find it difficult, dealing with Europe and European boards and their staff, just because they're not diverse. And they're like, the optics are really, really bad. And they can't go back home to the States with that kind of picture. And so I think that Europe is falling behind in that way, and that they do need to step up. So I'd say, yeah, they failed to manage. And if you threaten people's jobs, they just get, even more defensive. Yeah. But when you were talking about attrition, I'm like, yes. So who do you recruit? How do you recruit? Where do you recruit? All those questions. What do you do even about, kids are supposed to do that thing where they go into work. What do they call that?
Work experience.
Yeah, work experience. Yeah. Which high schools do you go to find the kids to come and do work experience in your place? When I used to be on the Arts Council Northwest Board, I just kept going on year after year that you have to stop arts organizations having unpaid interns. Unpaid interns. Who can afford to do that?
Yes.
They automatically said, we don't want any Black people, because most Black people, who can afford to work for nothing? Are you kidding me? So, things like that you have to attack as well. Because I know loads of people who did those unpaid internships, and then lo and behold, they got jobs, probably that weren't even advertised. So it's just like unfair, ridiculous. Stop it.
Yeah, boom. I think that's a good sentiment to unless anyone else has anything to add. I was going to say maybe I'm conscious of the time and that we delayed you all a bit at the beginning with the tech issues. Does anyone else have anything they want to say? Are we happy to stop? Good. Sweet. Well, thank you all three of you for coming and speaking. It's been really, really interesting discussion, and I hope that the people, when they get to watch it, will enjoy it, and there'll be some interesting discussion in the comments. But yeah, thank you so much, all three of you, and I hope you have a good rest of your day. And good luck with the festival, Cheryl. That's really soon now. I hope it goes well. Is it all going to be online?
It's all online.
Yeah.
And you can go to, if you hold on a second, you can get tickets at Contact. Cool. So that's www. Well, it's Contact Manchester, CONTACTMCR.com. And if you look at what's on, you'll see BGA 2020. That's Black Gold Arts. That's us. And we've got 10 events, and it's going to be all weekend, that whole weekend. One of them is a grime party. One is a Sunday garden party. And, you know, so there's loads and loads of stuff. There's music. There's a Vogue workshop, Vogue dance workshop. So check it out. Come on. And I have a film. Yay.
Yeah.
One woman. So, yeah, so come on down and have a look.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. That sounds really, really cool. Yeah, great. So yeah, check it out, Contact. We'll put a link in when we post this.
Yeah.
In the comments so people can
I'll try and get the link in the chat now.
Great. Oh, Peter's beat you to it, I think, with the website.
Oh, great. Okay. Thank you, Pete.
But yeah, thank you all so much for coming today, and yeah, enjoy the rest of your.
Yep. Thanks. Lovely meeting you, Dayo.
Lovely to meet you. Definitely enjoyed this conversation.
Really interesting to hear. Yeah. And nice to see you again, Pete. Long time no see. Thank you, man.